I like salad. Do you like salad?
Hi, I'm Hostion Ho. I'm living in Vancouver, BC, Canada, unceded territory of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I am an immigrant to Canada from China.
Hey everyone, I'm Andrea coming to you from Victoria, but more importantly known as unceded Akwesasne territory of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, and I am an immigrant from the United States of America. And you're listening to
Canadian Salad.
Canadian Salad.
Hi everyone,
Hey,
welcome back to
everybody.
another episode.
Yes, we are here again for all of you people out there. How are you today, Hoshin?
I am feeling very good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. The weather was just so warm this past weekend. It was just so nice and all the birds. I don't know. I don't know about you, but sometimes when you take a moment to get away from work and you just look outside or you go for a drive or a hike, you pinch yourself and you're like, how is it that I'm living here? It's so beautiful. Anyway.
I mean, I remember those moments. I haven't had in a while.
Yeah. Cement doesn't give off the same vibe, is what you're saying.
We do have a
No.
lot of beaches, and parks that I can take
It's
advantage of.
true.
Just
True.
haven't been a while. I
Yes.
need I definitely
Indeed.
need that. Yes.
Yeah.
But yes, this
for sure.
land does give us a lot
Yeah.
of beauty
So
and
much.
that we can appreciate.
Yeah.
But this land also can give us a lot of trauma too.
That's true. That's true. And I think even with maybe history, but even like with climate change and what's happening, I think we're all kind of like the land is more on our minds. So, and that's what this episode is about. How land is connected to our identity, our sense of being, and basically the way that we live, essentially. I'm really excited to have this conversation because honestly, I feel like as immigrants, it's a little bit, there's a lot of nuance, I think, when it comes to identifying with land that you weren't born on, and land that was actually, governed and maintained by Indigenous people. And we are not Indigenous people of this land, right? So
I
yeah.
agree. I think, especially in light of a lot of recent events, definitely give me some an awakening in terms of how I
Yeah.
used to see it. Especially, I used to live in a land I was indigenous to that land, coming from China, and in many ways, I was colonized too. So now that I become immigrant to this land that I know I'm not indigenous to, also kind of in many ways, I'm also living in a life and living in a space that colonizer has kind of settled for me.
Yeah.
It definitely gives me very different perspectives for sure.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, would you say that in coming here that you identified with Indigenous people, just knowing that because you had lived through or you've experienced being colonized? So did you find that when you learned about Canada's history that you felt like you could identify with them?
I definitely can
in that
identify a little
experience?
bit. Yeah, then I
Yeah.
can identify a little bit more because first, not all Hans are colonizers in Macau and Hong Kong. Both were
Okay.
colonized, by the British, by the Portuguese and the British.
Okay.
So I think people there definitely can, have experience of that. And I think the idea that even though it is your land, that you are so attached that you is yours, but then somehow this other outsider come to your place I would say they have no attachment to it. They never contribute to it. Somehow they have way more access than you to this land, no matter resources or power or money. It definitely is kind of this constant frustration and anger. So
Yeah.
definitely is something that me and many other people have been colonized, live in a colonized land can identify with. I think
Yeah.
can relate to.
For sure.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. I mean,
What about you?
I unfortunately, I cannot relate because being from the States, it was a colonized place. So my attachment or even just identification with land has never been something that has been strong because my father's side was from Germany. My mother's side was from Scotland and Mexico. And so there's been all of these different pieces that I've really never visited. There's just no connection that I feel because generations before me immigrated. So then I actually have been challenged in moving to Canada and learning more about the ways in which Turtle Island was colonized, the genocide, things like that. I can't relate, but at the same time, in my time living in Canada, I've really grown and learned a lot about what that actually means. And it's made me want to be a better advocate and ally for people who are wanting rights to their own land or agency across Canada or across the United States. And even with what's happening in Gaza and knowing that Palestinian people, are really wanting to stay true to the land where they were born, where they lived, they worked for generations upon generations upon generations. There's a much bigger awareness in my mind now than there ever has been. And so I guess I don't understand, but I'm learning, and I'm really, really thankful that I can learn and hopefully can do something to make a better difference. But it's just something I don't relate to, unfortunately. So.
Yeah, but I think you can relate to or not. I think the human capacity can definitely should allow you to understand and empathize, that kind of pain. And it's like thinking about your ancestral home. Let's say you have an ancestral home or the home you have lived, that your grandparents have lived, your parents have lived, you have lived, and suddenly someone just came in your house and decided you have to get out of here and this is my home now. I think that kind of pain, that kind of shock, that kind of, frustration, I think is a lot of us can kind of understand it. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
And even knowing that my mom's side of the family were from Chihuahua, Mexico. So I told my husband, I want to go to that city in Mexico. Yeah, it might be huge, but knowing that is where my ancestry was at one point in time, there is this connection to that is a piece of my identity, even though I can't understand what that would be like to be completely removed from where I live. So I think land it encompasses a lot of things. And so to kind of segue, Hostion, could you maybe share why is land tied to identity and all of those things?
First, I want to let people know, all of you beautiful people who are listening know that land shapes who we are. Because obviously geography, the people for generations in places that people grew up in, the climate, the landscape, whether it's mountainy places, a flat plain or deserty place, all this geography factors affects how this group, they interact with others, how they organize their daily activity, their social hierarchy, many of that, all this. So that's why the geography in many ways affects our human activity. And hence this human activity also shapes our characters. And
sure.
So far also affects our identity, obviously, because the culture was born in those places. And this culture is a huge part of who we are, obviously. To elaborate on that as well, there's many research have shown that anthropology research has shown that specific areas, people somehow, no matter how far away they're from each other, they share a lot of similar characters. I found this research from Casta Monu University. The link will be shared on the website. That, for example, that communities that live in coastal and temperate climates regions are more civilized and docile, while those who living in mountainous and higher regions are more, quote unquote, rigid. And there's many other researchers who support that point. And also, people who live far from equator are generally more extroverted and open to new experience. That means people who live usually closer to the equator generally more introverted. So there is shared characters. Yeah, there's shared characters just because of the region, because of temperature.
Sure.
That the place that you live.
Yeah, I remember reading a book, and I don't remember what it was. It was talking about hot climates and cold climate cultures, and how warmer climate cultures are more collective. They're more colorful, usually. They're more loud. Like their music is definitely a reflection of kind of just the sun being out a lot. Food tends to be in hot climate cultures a lot more flavor. Whereas opposed to
Mhm.
cold climate cultures are pretty dull, boring food. People stay pretty, inclusive and kind of in their own spaces because it's colder. It's harder to have that social engagement. So anyway, I can't remember the name of the book, but that I resonate with what you're saying in the research that you're pointing out, because absolutely, I mean, seasons dictate how you and I live, right? The
Exactly,
plans that we
yes.
make. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and how many daylights, during the day. If you live in Europe and live in the equator, your access to
Right.
daylight is very different, and that definitely had a
Right.
huge effect of how you kind of
Mm,
organize your day or how many people you
hmm
see in a day, even.
hmm
Um,
Exactly.
and then a huge part of also why we say geography also kind of shapes our identity is also the identity acquisition, because the feeling of belonging to where the person lives and the responsibility for him to feel that is someone who feel belong to a place and feel responsible for a place. It is a sign of identity acquisition. It's only when we have the idea of belonging or feeling personally engaged and invested, and then we started
Mm,
to gain that identity because it has an anchor somewhere, and that often than not is actually the place that we live. A great a great example is our national identity. Usually when people ask you where you're from, it's usually everyone say a country. But when we say a country, it's
sure.
not really the passport. No, really the president or the party that's governing the country is usually the piece of land.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
that's how
That's the association.
that
Yeah.
is the
hmm
association. That also is a
hmm
great example of how geography or land, quote unquote land, that shapes how we are, how we see ourselves. And
hmm
to segue also, like even that question I just mentioned, where are you from? That
Yeah.
question is that
Oh, we're gonna
is
do an episode on that question because that is a whole question. But yes, go ahead.
yeah, that simple question itself is charged with the idea of how land shapes us, or how we associate land, how we see ourselves in the shape in the lens of region, country,
hmm
all of that, and how the environment impact how we relate
hmm
ourselves to the world. Just that one simple question. That this researcher also found this really interesting from Penn State University. It says that question itself, or like the idea of land, that how we see land personally is first, people feel very significant, like feel significant attachment to places. But that scale of attachment, it varies from very intimate. For example, my bed. People feel very
Sure.
intimate to their bed, to their apartment, maybe to even to the village that they grew up in, and to distance, for example, maybe the whole province that they've never been. And then even if within the same country, they might feel very distant to that specific place, even though maybe it is within their country. So our attachment to places are varies. And so it depends when you talk about people's the relationship to land, it has to be very specific, whether a homeland and a faraway piece of land. And also in terms of land, every places that we created by human have is encoded with identity, in the sense that, for example, washrooms is a man or a woman or for family.
Sure.
So
Mm,
every land itself, as long as this human activity is already encoded with identity, with even sometimes even with the religion practice, for example, a mosque, a church, a sacred land, a
right.
holy land. So land
Mm,
itself, when we say land, it almost cannot escape the attachment of emotion or human identity, unless it's talk about a natural
mm,
piece of land that is just a forest and no one ever been to, obviously. Um,
mm, mhm.
and this place is when we talk about that, that encoded with identity. Also, of course, this identity sometimes also included some people and excluded some people. For example, maybe
Yeah.
a Catholic church. Well, then if you don't have that faith, then you're excluded in that space.
Sure.
And then same as washroom. That's why there's such a debate of a woman washroom, a man washroom, a transgender washroom, all gender washroom, because
Right.
we all know deep, maybe not consciously, but we all know spaces is usually
hmm
inclusive or exclusive. And that's also the context that we need to know. The land inherently is not necessary for all, but
hmm
that is significant to some, not necessarily to everyone. And
Right,
that's
right.
all I want to elaborate about our relationship with land.
Yeah, I mean, it's so, there's lots of layers there. I think we could unpack this a lot more. 30 minutes is really hard, but I
About
just want to kind of
podcasting.
capitalize. Yeah, I want to capitalize on a few points that you made. So the question, kind of, where are you from? We pull on what we identify as where we are from, right? A location, a
Yeah.
region. And I would say even asking that question in and of itself is disconnecting that person from the current location,
Yeah, it
right? It's
is.
saying, no, you're not, you don't belong here. Where are you from? Right. So I feel like, to your point, how it can disconnect and it can push people out of certain regions where they belong, quote unquote, that is implied. And I think the second thing is, in my own experience, because I'm from the States and I have, very distant relationship with my ancestors' land, that was not something part of our culture that we necessarily would ponder or want to know about, right? It was, oh,
Mm-hmm.
your genealogy, who is this person? Where did they come from? And blah, 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 blah. But the land was not something ingrained in my identity or in my family. But hearing you talk, it sounds like it was always there. My relationship with the land is always there.
Yes.
It was unconsciously there. And when I go back to the States and I go back to where I grew up, and the same streets and the houses and the place I went to high school, these specific places, they just unearth so much memory and so much identity of who I am. And so I just
Exactly.
wanted to say that, yeah, I completely identify with your point.
And I think a lot of us, of course, a lot of this idea, we not maybe not as you mentioned, like consciously know all these things, but once we're in that space, we know whether this space is for me or not for me. Like we have
Yes.
attachment to spaces that's we just train in that way. Whether
Yeah.
in everyday life from people's, like even the word, like that question, where are you from, is hinting that you are not from here. So
Right.
because of this kind of sometimes even passive aggressive comments, it gives us an idea whether a certain space is for us or not.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So, and that's to kind of segue into this next half of our episode. We're going to talk about land trauma and what happens when people are forcibly removed. So I'm going to just mention in brief, maybe two historical and one present day example of land trauma. And the first is right here in Canada with the
Yeah.
Indian Act. A great book I highly recommend everyone to read. It's 21 Things You May Not Know About the Indian Act. And it's an excellent book, but reserves were created to force a very mobile people, a very mobile community, and nations to one specific location, right? So
Mm-hmm.
indigenous people, they would fish by the rivers during a certain time of the year, and then they would follow the bison during other times of the year, right? The ebb and flows of nature and food sourcing and all of that was connected to the land and the ways in which they lived.
Yes.
And so when the Indian Act came into play, there were restrictions that people couldn't leave without an Indian quote agent, right? So this white person was basically, whether he had a good day or a bad day, he could say, no, you can't go visit your family. No, you can't go fishing in that lake. No, you can't go see your son who's at this residential school, right? That it was
Mm-hmm.
all up to this one particular person. And so it forced everyone to stay stationary. So those
Mm-hmm.
ebbs and flows of the region and sourcing and food and everything like that were completely constricted. Absolutely awful. The second example would be the Japanese internment camps in Canada. So this is right out of the Canadian Museum of Human Rights. But Japanese-born citizens, the majority were in British Columbia. I don't know if you knew this, Hoshin. I actually
Yes.
recently learned
I
this.
actually
Yeah.
I
Okay.
actually know.
You
Yeah.
you know this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it was like 22 or 23,000 Japanese people were living in BC. These were Japanese people who were born in Canada. They were born in BC. These aren't first generation immigrants, right?
Yes.
These are people who've been here for a while, right? They had communities, they had homes. And so when the bombing of Pearl Harbor happened, on Hawaii, which again, that's a colonized land. So when that
Yeah.
happened, course, the US put Japanese people in internment camps because they were afraid everyone was a spy. So Canada was
Spy.
like, hey, that sounds good. That
I would
sounds
do
good.
the
We'll do that
same.
too.
Yeah.
So they were forced to leave BC and they were forced to live in camps. All their land was sold. All their homes were
Yeah.
sold, businesses,
Property.
everything.
Yeah.
And they had told Japanese people, we're going to take care of your land and your property. So when you come back, and that didn't happen.
Of
People
course it
couldn't
didn't
come
help.
back. They were banned from coming back to BC. Families were completely separated. The relationship to this land that they had lived and breathed and built their lives on was completely removed.
Mhm.
And I was speaking with someone who is married to a Japanese Canadian, and he said growing up, we didn't learn the Japanese language. We really tried to assimilate as much as we could because of this instance, right?
Yeah.
And so that trauma of being removed, that trauma of saying, okay, where you are and where you've been no longer can happen, and someone else is governing your life and taking away your traditions, your culture, your relationship to a region and your relationship to community, it completely traumatizes you because, to your point, it's a part of who you are. Your
It is.
identity is wrapped up in that. So that's the second historical piece. The third one is historical, but it's also present day. So it's Israel's occupation of Palestine. So I don't know if you knew, but on March 30th, it was Land Day for Palestine. And Land Day is a day to express for Palestinians their unyielding generational connection to the Palestinian land by making Land Day. And they created this day because in 1948, briefly the history, colonizers came in and said, okay, we're going to take sections of Palestine and we're going to create Israel. And that's what
Yes. Yeah.
happened. And so people were forcibly, again, removed from their homes, the fig trees, the olive trees, all the things that were generationally kept and preserved and created to have business and community and families and traditions were completely taken away from them. And so March 30th is this Land Day celebration, and they've been celebrating it and demonstrating with their lives this day. And it has not ended well in years past, and it's not ending well right now. And so all that to say, from all of these experiences, all of these traumas, all of these ways in which people literally being, in essence, raped from where their very existence was, you don't just, oh, no big deal. It's fine. Then do whatever you want to do, where to live, who I can see, when I can see them, what language I should speak, when I shouldn't, right? No person, I have not met one person who would be like, yeah, that sounds like fun. No, it wouldn't be. It's
It will not be.
traumatizing because it's who you are. And to strip that is to strip your identity. And then you become lost and you don't know who you are. And that's searching. And I think that that's something that as immigrants, we are always navigating our identity and who we are because we're not in the places that we grew up anymore.
I think, yeah, I think if for people who never move to another place, not even maybe for people who never leave their own town, they will never understand. Like, because I feel like sometimes even just go to a different school, you will understand the
Right.
difficulty of kind of we have to re-assimilate. Because maybe just different town, to be same language, people similar to you, but then they are social structure might slightly different. You are the new guy in block that you also remove from places and people that you're familiar with. Now you have to make new friends, get used to this new land, new grocery store, new washrooms, new classrooms.
Mm-hmm.
I think that
Mm-hmm.
not that, of course, compared to the Japanese and the Palestinian, it's not the same scale. But I think if people had ever done that, then you can, if you kind of 10 times that feeling, you will understand how difficult it can be for people that are forced to, move out of their land.
Right. They're forced.
Yeah.
And that's the other piece, right? Like you have no choice.
Yeah, of
you
course,
live, right?
Yeah. When it's forced, it's also about dignity as well, right? It's about dignity,
Yes.
about respect, about freedom. So that is, agency,
right?
especially.
Self-governing mobility and decision-making, like that's the encapsulation of freedom. It's just like total self-sovereignty.
Exactly.
And when that
So
self-sovereignty isn't there, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's definitely can be very traumatizing to the kind of association of who we are. I actually, when I was in Berlin, I went to a museum. I forgot the museum's name, but the museum is to commemorate, of course, the concentration camp of for the Jews. And one of
Mhm.
the area of the museum was just tall stone columns, and then the different height, and it's like a maze, and the ground was very uneven. Just sometimes rock come out. It's like a tripping hazard as well. But it
Yeah.
was just to create this kind of feeling when you walk inside that area, just to make you feel this feeling of dissociation in a land, in a strange land. That's how it
Mm,
feels when you go to a strange land, go to this kind of maze-like place. It's looking
mm,
weird. Nothing is uniform. The floor is very uneven. So just anytime you could trip and you feel dissociated, disoriented. But this is where you are
mhm,
now, and there's nothing, nowhere to get out. And
mm,
I feel like that is part of the feeling of being in a brand new, like you're forced to a brand new land that
mhm.
nothing looks familiar, not everything looks weird, and you just don't know where is the exit or the entrance. Or in many ways, you don't have any. That's where
Right.
you have to get used to this uneven
Yeah.
land, this ununiformed stone column. And
Right.
yeah, it's just remind me of that.
That's a powerful image. And I think that is why when we hear words like land back, they're saying, give us back the agency and the freedom to move across this land in the ways in which that we used to live,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
That agency. And it's about righting the wrongs that have been done as well. Land back
mm-hmm.
is a way to say that was absolutely horrific. The fact that the Indian Act is still a law, it is still upheld by the House of Commons. It is, and I've spoken with some local indigenous communities here
Mm-hmm,
in
mm-hmm.
the Songhees and Esquimalt, and they're like, we hope that in our children's lifetime, that Indian Act is abolished.
Well,
Until then, we work as hard as we can to make sure that
mm-hmm,
it is. Like, it floors me that it's still there. I feel as though our relationship as immigrants to this land that we know as Canada is really, really important. And I think it's a part of our identity. Um,
mm-hmm.
to kind of end on this topic, I guess I just kind of want to advocate for indigenizing immigration, and indigenizing the immigrant process. So there's a wonderful literature review piece that came out in 2022. It's called Indigenous Perspectives of Immigration Policy in a Settler Country. And I just want to read this one quote. It
Mm-hmm.
says, in a non-colonial context, immigrants would observe the laws and adjust the ways, not of the settler colonizers, but of the indigenous population. So this is if indigenous people were given governance over immigration policy, which
Mm-hmm,
both you
mm-hmm.
and I know that that indigenous people, First Nations, elders, the authorities of certain community groups are not involved in these conversations.
They are
They are
not.
not a
No.
part of the immigration levels. And in fact, immigrants get a lot more services and sometimes rights than Indigenous people that have been here since time immemorial. If Indigenous people had agency, if they had a governing role in immigration
Mm-hmm.
policy, the kind of immigration process that we would experience would actually be much different, right?
I would
Um,
assume so. Yes. Because
yes,
all
yeah,
like the immigration law is, by these white colonizers.
it is. Yeah.
They
And
don't know.
colonization, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, they
Sorry.
don't know anything about. No, this is they don't know anything about oppression. They don't know anything about um, you know, being removed from a land to a brand new land because they move as they wish. All that
Mhm,
privilege kind of put them in a position of not understanding, all the ins and outs and difficulties of the human experience in general of
mhm,
immigration, especially
mhm.
for people that are not white, not, in that privileged place.
Exactly. Exactly. Because if we remember and we look at the history of Canada, most all the laws, the early immigration laws, and we see this now even with refugee settlement, we
Mm-hmm.
see the government's response to a country that was predominantly white, and their response and the ways that they made, huge waves for people to come here, which I think, yay, great. But when you look at people who are on the waiting list from like African countries, it is despairingly different. Immigration was a colonization process.
It is a
It
colonization process,
was a
exact.
way to make Canada white, to keep it European, right? And so because Indigenous people are still not at that governing level, then the regulations and the policies that are made are going to favor predominantly white facing and white countries. And we see this.
Exactly.
We
Mm-hmm.
see this even with new measures that are coming out from IRCC with student visas.
Which is very
And stuff. Yeah, that's a whole other thing. I want to point out one other piece of article. It's called Immigration Process is a Colonized Process. And it comes out of New Zealand. It's written in 2017. And it's actually from the Manaki indigenous people. So there's a word that they use for immigration, and it's Manat. I'm sorry if I'm going to say this wrong. Manakitanga. It's a core value that basically is defined as the process of showing and receiving care, respect, kindness, and hospitality. It's often used in reference to hosting responsibilities of the Mana people, the Mana Wenua, and when met with visitors, but also extends to care that is taken to manage and protect resources. It's a system that would address economic interpretives, but basically would say that everyone can mutually benefit. This idea that we are a host and we're responsible to show care, respect, kindness, and hospitality. That is not a colonized process. That is not the colonial way, right? So I feel like as immigrants who are here, right, and recognizing that is, there is a type of reconciliation we have to make with the land that we're standing on, the land that we are privileged to even just experience. Like me saying at the beginning of the podcast, I can't believe I live here, right? And acknowledging, oh, wait a minute, I am here. And I actually have no right to be here, and recognizing what this place was to the original people who lived on this land, and looking at it through that lens, and having a lot of appreciation and advocacy for who it belongs to, and making sure that in this same kind of term, I'm showing care and respect, kindness, and hospitality to the land.
Yeah. I think that's why land acknowledgement is so important. I know many people can say maybe it's performative, anyway. No matter how performative it is, I think it's still very important, because that land acknowledgement reminds us every time that we are not indigenous to this land. And that I really hope that it is the Canadian identity. Now we're talking about how land shapes, how shapes our identity. And this is what the land is that we're not from. And I hope that is the Canadian identity to us, that we know this land belongs to the indigenous.
Yeah, I agree. And question, Hostion, I mean, because just back to your original points about land being identity and shaping identity, as immigrants, what would you say would help us frame that identity, especially since we are settlers and guests on this land?
I think for some knowledge to know that you are a guest and settler on this land, know who the original indigenous to this land, who are they, how their life was, and what their life now, and know the struggle. And then as someone who lives reaping the benefits of this land, what can we do to help them to get, get back that sovereignty that's owed to them in many ways, or strip away from them. And I think for me, that will be one of the great things that as an immigrant can do to this land. Yeah, as a voice, especially if you're in a privileged space, then you definitely should have utilized that power that you have.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I agree. I haven't felt connected to where I lived, in the United States to a degree, unconsciously. I think I'm much more connected. I do feel like connecting ourselves with this land is a really powerful way to not only be mindful of the original people, but also to advocate for the protection, care, and, similar to what you said. But I think that connection to the land, taking time to know what kind of land this is, right? Really spending time in nature and where you are, listening to the wind, understanding the ebbs and flows of that region. The air that we breathe is shared, right?
Yeah.
Just as the ground that we walk on. And so recognizing that and cherishing that and protecting that. And I would say for myself, my identity is, I do feel like in all that I've learned and all that I've actually had to really, if I may use like a Christian word, like repent of, to change, is to be a better advocate. I feel like as an immigrant, I want to be a better advocate. And this advocacy is a part of my identity.
Mhm.
Especially as an immigrant, knowing that our rights are very loosely held by the authority of one, guy in a suit, and understanding that that the rights of the original people are also held and have been held very strongly, very vulnerable too, in that same way, and looking at that and saying, okay, how do I speak up? How do I advocate? Like, this is my responsibility. This is who I am as an immigrant to Canada. And I don't want that to ever change.
Yes, I think I hope too, that is the immigrant
Yeah.
identity to,
Yeah.
be advocate. I think
Yeah.
I agree. Yes.
Yeah.
Woo! Thank you for that
Oh.
conversation. Wow.
I know. I wish we could talk to you all for hours and hours. I mean, this sounds like a topic. Like, I would honestly want like a big, pint of beer. Yeah.
I loved it.
So, well, should we do our
Canadian pop quiz. Yes. Okay.
Well, I will let you go first.
You want to go first? Okay. This question, of course, Andrea didn't know, also didn't know the answer. That's why it makes it fun.
Yes.
Okay. I hope you get it. You have to rank the following 3 countries from the biggest landmass to the smallest landmass. Like with 3 countries.
Dear, this is easy.
Yeah, it's easy. Is Canada, US, and China. You rank them.
Those 3. Okay.
Yeah.
Ooh. I'm going to say China, Canada, US.
The biggest
China
landmass
being
is China?
the biggest. The middle is Canada, and United States is the third.
So sorry.
No, I didn't get it. What is it?
The first is Canada, and then the US, and then it's China.
Smaller?
China is smaller, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I just assumed it was bigger because I guess on the map it's just so
big.
Okay. I'm not good with geography. I mean, that's part of being an American. That's part of my identity. But
we're talking about land. We're talking about land.
We are talking about land. Yes, I know. Okay, so my question for you is, what is the original name of Canada actually mean?
Oh, it means village.
Yeah, it does. Or settlement. Yeah.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, well, okay. So this is from, I really tried to find an Indigenous resource within this time frame, and unfortunately I didn't find one, but the name Canada likely comes from the Huron Iroquois word Kanata, which means village or settlement. The story is that in 1535, there were 2 young Indigenous youth who told the French explorer Jacques Cartier about the route to Canada. They were actually referring to the village of Stadacona, which is site of the present day city of Quebec. And so because, he was just, I don't know, a white Frenchman, he just like, oh, I guess this is
the land, the name of the land. Yeah, this is Canada. I heard the story too, yes.
Did you? Okay, yeah. So anyway, for you.
So I got the answer. You are welcome.
You get the gold star. Absolutely. So, well, thank you everyone for joining us on this podcast.
Leave us a comment with your favorite place and we can see, maybe match you with someone else.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And stay tuned because actually our next episode is going to tie a little bit into the topic we talked about today. We're going to talk about patriotism and the pride of immigrant Canadians. And so another identity piece, but we think it's going to be really, really good. So have a beautiful week. Did I miss anything, Hostion?
No, it's perfect.
No? Okay.
Everything covered.
Sometimes I do. Anyway, so have a good week, everyone. So much love to you all. Enjoy the spring weather. And yeah, we'll talk to you later.
We'll talk to you next week.
Okay, bye.
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 Canadian Salad is written and produced in British Columbia, Canada by Hostion and Andrea McCoy. Theme music is by Naver Avetyan from Pixabay.
This has been a good Drinklin production.